Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, Yale, Georgetown, other schools illegally collude to limit student financial aid, lawsuit alleges. That's a great article by Melissa Korn of the Wall Street Journal. Our questions from our listeners are, question 1, living in Northern Virginia, many parents feel when their child is applying to Virginia highly selective schools such as UVA, there is a bias against Nova high schools. I've heard from several students there is a quota system, and they only let a tiny number in from each school, even if they are well above the middle 50th percent of applicants. Have you found this to be true? And our question number 2 is, how do I select a college? That's a student from New Jersey. Our interview is Understanding UCLA. Gary Clark, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions, UCLA, part 1 of 2. And instead of our college spotlight, Mark and Lisa will have their third and final debate on whether Connecticut College acted inappropriately in telling a student they will admit him if they withdraw their test scores.
So friends, just to show the power of what I oftentimes refer to as a listening family, tonight 26 of us, college counselors from all over the country, actually the world, we have some international, will be meeting. We have public school, we have charter school, we have private day, we have boarding, we have IECs, independent educational consultants, and we have CBO counselors from 12 states all meeting. And that all came about from this podcast. I noticed when we had our webinars with Sam Prody from Middlebury and Gil Villanueva from Richmond and Lisa Prescott from UCSB, Santa Barbara, that a lot of college counselors showed up. So I said, hey, we have a lot of college counselors listening. We formed a support group to sharpen each other's skills, and all because of this podcast. So certainly thank you all for that. Now, announcement. The Coalition for College, which is the biggest competitor to the Common App, is going through a major overhaul. They are dropping the controversial tech platform CollegeNet, which really ticked off a lot of colleges that they're using college, and I won't go into it all right now. But more importantly, they're merging their application with SCORE. SCORE's the Naviance competitor, the software that counselors use to help students with the college process. This is a big story. It probably deserves it in the news, but we have so many big stories right now, but we'll watch the development of this and possibly do an in the news on it later. You may have heard Dave say the third debate. Yes, Lisa and I are having our third and final debate about whether anything was unethical or untoward about Connecticut College telling a student if they withdraw their test score, they will be admitted. So you get a double dose of Lisa and I in this episode, both in the question and at the end. Now, warning, this debate gets kind of feisty and emotions get raw. I thought at one point Lisa was going to hang up on me, Dave. but just joking a little, but not much. So if you don't like tension, you might want to skip over this one. And we actually thought about not even airing it, but we decided to air it for several reasons. One, we pride ourselves on being authentic and keeping it real. The main reason is because we hope that as you hear disparate perspectives argued and articulated, it will help you process. That's a great way to learn. And then finally, in many ways, my conversation with Lisa simulates what actually happens sometimes on an admissions committee. So think of yourself as being right on an admissions committee. What do I mean by that? Well, Lisa and I have different perspectives based on our experiences, and you bring your entire realm of experiences to reading an application and a file. And what happens, admission officers get attached to students, and then they fight for them a lot of times at committee. And not everyone tends to agree with you. You think this kid is amazing, and you've just fallen in love with them, maybe because of the recommendations or the essays that moved you, or you met them at a fair. And you just have to have this person, the student. Not everybody agrees with you. So emotions sometimes can get raw. And so you kind of get a little bit of insight into how sometimes a committee can function by listening to this. So I think you'll enjoy it. It's a little long, but it's at the very end. If you're sick of Lisa and I debating, just skip it after the Gary Clark interview. You can call it a day. All right, Dave, admissions tip. So go to the institutional research section of every college you are considering. It is a gold mine. You'll find a treasure trove of data there. What are some of the things that are there? Common data set, that's usually where you'll find it. NESE data, which we talked about a few weeks ago, you'll find it there. Graduation rate data, strategic plans. Where's the school going over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? That's all in the institutional research section. Enrollment reports, trends, and every college has an institutional research department. In fact, my very next interview after Gary Clark is someone who formerly served in a role in institutional research. So you can look forward to that. All right, Dave, for admissions vernacular, you're 1 for 1 on the last 2 weeks.
Awesome. Starting out the year, great.
Yeah, because I know I asked hard stuff, so 50% is actually really good. But I have a feeling you might get this one. Underclassmen. What is underclassmen?
Well, they're the freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors.
Oh, no. Underclassmen are not undergraduates. Freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior would be undergraduates.
Oh, okay. Sorry. This is the high schoolers. Okay. Underclassmen. Well, maybe they're the freshmen and the sophomores.
Freshmen and sophomores in college. So sometimes you'll hear, so that would be correctamundo. Sometimes you'll hear it in an athletic context, right? Where as an underclassman, he's jumping right to the pros and not foregoing the junior and senior year. You'll hear some people that define underclassmen as freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Anybody but seniors. But the most common definition is freshmen and sophomores. So it gets a little confusing. You got two different definitions floating out there. All right, the big number. Ready for some staggering stats on grade inflation, Dave?
I'm ready.
So in 1966, a study was done to see how many college students who enrolled had grades of A-, A, or A+. And the number was 15.4%. So another way of putting it is less than 1 in 6. Fast forward 55 years later, and the Cooperative Institutional Research Program at UCLA did a similar study, not of UCLA, but of all U.S. college students, newly enrolled college students. How many of them have grades of A-, A, or A+? 59.3%.
Dang.
Almost 6 in 10. You wonder why it's so hard for kids to get in. They're like buried in a sea of A's that the admissions officers are reading. And they have to get out of there and emerge.
Yeah, and this dovetails what we often say about the double-edged sword of not having test scores. Because bottom line, take away the test scores, and you're looking at a whole bunch of people with identical A's. So what does that mean? You really have to go overboard on the rigor, because how else are they going to distinguish your A from every other A in a sea of A's?
That's a really good point, and I actually have something more to say about that I'm going to save for 215. I have a tip related to that, but just a little tease. You got to wait 3 weeks for that one. All right, so you know what, Dave? I got so caught up in the euphoria of our anniversary. I broke out Tony's song and everything last week that I forgot every 5th week we're supposed to do Stuck's Rant, Stuck's Rave. That was supposed to happen on 210. So rather than wait till 215, I'm just going to throw it in here on 211. But before I do the rant, the other day Kara says to me, she says, "Dad, you grind my gears." And I'm like, what do you mean I grind your gears? You grind my gears. You get on my nerves. So that should be my new name for the rant. What is it that's grinding our gears out here? I'm like, that's a terrible thing to say about your father. Well, you do.
Well, interesting. I recognize that comes from manual transmission cars. Has she ever driven a stick? We're in a Tesla generation. They can't be using that.
Yeah, I can call her being dated. You're showing your age. I have a feeling Lawrence told Dave that she grinds her gears sometimes, different words maybe.
Yeah, euphemistically.
Sure. So, all right. So what is it grinding my gears? Well, so it's, I've been wanting us to do an article on this, David, and I got to find a good one because I remember really our first year of the podcast. Anika and I did a big article on how UC Irvine over-enrolled 700. I haven't done an article in a while on schools over-enrolling. And I want us to do one because it actually was pretty prevalent last year. That doesn't grind my gears because I know how hard it is to get that precise number. But when you're going to over-enroll, don't do what University of Tampa did. And I actually had 2 students go there last year, and they were pissed off. So in late May, they broke communication out to parents and everybody that we don't have enough room in the dorms. And everybody was scrambling. Where are you going to stay? How are you going to get there? And communication was terrible. People weren't answering the phones. They had students answering the phones, and nobody knew what was going on. Where's my kid going to stay? So listen, if you're at a school and you realize we're about to over-enroll because we didn't exactly predict things exactly right, that happens, and I realize it's very stressful. But you can't have terrible communication like that. And you should be notifying parents before late May, and you need to have a plan for housing, and you need to have somebody other than students who don't know what they're talking about answering the phone.
Yeah.
So I had to go off. Sorry, Tampa. I had to name names in this section. All right, my rave. So I'll tell you something else that happens a fair amount. We haven't talked about it very much on here, but it's a fair amount. And that is the school inadvertently sends a notice to students that's incorrect. And oftentimes it is something like, you were admitted when you weren't admitted. This actually happens more often than you'd think. But of course, there's thousands of colleges in this country. But my rave is for Central Michigan University. And the reason why, normally when this miscommunication goes out, Dave, especially when it has been telling people they were admitted when they weren't, what follows is an oops email. Oops, sorry, we hit send on the wrong batch. You weren't admitted, you were waitlisted, or you were denied. Now you can just imagine the stress and the angst and the turmoil from that type of emotional roller coaster. But what did Central Michigan do? Well, they inadvertently told 58 students that they were recipients of an award that covers full tuition, full room and board, money for books, and $5,000 for study abroad.
Whoa.
But guess why I'm giving them the rave?
They gave them money.
Ate it. They owned it. They ate it. They said, my bad. We'll raise the money and pony up. We're not going to take it away from you because of our mistake. So 58 kids hit the educational lottery.
Ding, 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 ding. Wow.
Shout out to Central Michigan for that. All right, Dave, we got a great article. Take it away, my friend.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right. This article is by Melissa Korn, and it is Yale, Georgetown, other top schools illegally collude to limit student financial aid, a lawsuit alleges. So 16 major U.S. universities, including Yale University, Georgetown University, and Northwestern University, are being sued for alleged antitrust violations because of the way they work together to determine financial aid awards for students. According to a lawsuit filed in Illinois federal court, representing 5 former students, they are saying that these schools price fixed and unfairly limited aid by using a shared methodology to calculate applicants' financial need. Now, under federal law, schools are allowed to collaborate on formulas for financial aid, but only if they don't consider the applicant's financial need in admissions decisions. This suit alleges that these schools did weigh their students' ability to pay in certain conditions. And lawyers say that more than 170,000 former undergraduate students who received partial financial aid going back 18 years may be able to join this suit as plaintiffs. Now, the schools are saying, some of them, no way. A Yale spokesman said the school's financial aid policy is, quote, 100% compliant with all laws. Caltech said that the school has confidence in its aid practices. And Brown said that the complaint was, quote, without merit. However, representatives from Columbia, Cornell, Duke, Georgetown, Northwestern, Notre Dame, Penn, and the University of Chicago declined to comment on pending litigation, and MIT said it would respond in court in due time. Now, this isn't the first time that colleges have been accused of anti-competitive behavior. In 2019, there was a lawsuit, and the admissions officers agreed to refrain from aggressive recruiting practices. In 1991, the Ivy League and MIT reached an agreement regarding allegations of price fixing. And in 1994, Congress passed legislation exempting from antitrust violations schools that practiced need-blind admissions, allowing them to create common guidelines for how to assess an applicant's financial need. But they still couldn't discuss aid offers for individual applicants. Well, this new lawsuit essentially says that they have been. It alleges that members of this group are violating federal law because they aren't entirely need blind. Rather, at least some of the schools consider financial aid by giving an admission edge to children of wealthy donors, and some also weigh applicants' finances when admitting them off the waiting list and looking at their finances in weighing those admission decisions. So let me stop here, Mark, and get your take on what the impact of all this is.
Yeah, great summary as usual, Dave. And once again, Wall Street Journal, now, I don't agree with everything about them, but they oftentimes are ones that break these stories when it comes to college admissions. And once again, there's the Journal broke this story. And I'm also going to quote a little bit from a really good article I liked by Ivana Saric of Axios. I thought she had a really good article entitled Lawsuit Alleges Top Colleges Illegally Collude to Limit Financial Aid. And so this is controversial on a lot of levels. I want to first start by talking about the two past times schools were accused of anti-trust behavior. I didn't agree with the Department of Justice in either one of those cases. So 2019, our podcast had been live on that, so we discussed that. That was, you remember, Dave, I was really upset. That's when they basically came
out
in
of the poach.
Yeah. They basically
out of the poach.
Yeah. So basically, they a lot of things that they said, like, schools can actively recruit even when people are enrolled. You can give people better offers and incentivize them for early decision. And the concern is just now you just created the Wild Wild West. And the 1991 case, I disagreed with that as well. So what was actually happening there was group of schools, like I said, the Ivy League and MIT, the concern was that they didn't want it to be the Wild Wild West, and everybody was just throwing money at kids in order to get the top kids that they wanted. So they said, why don't we standardize our offers so that people are truly picking colleges based on where they really want to go, not because somebody, not because of an all-out bidding war. And that was seen as antitrust behavior, and so they had to change their policies. The thing you have to keep in mind is these are the most generous schools in the country when it comes to need-based aid. Now, they're generous because of their huge endowments. So they formed something called the 568 Presidents Group, and these schools continue to do things that are more generous than other schools, once again, because they have the money to do it. Case in point, in the past, if a 529 plan was in a student's name and not in a parent's name, most schools were going to ding you in their EFC formula. These schools said, no, we're not going to do that. These schools agreed to limit the amount of home equity that could be used in the EFC or the financial aid formula, so to be more generous to families. So these schools, once again, not because they're more noble, mostly because they have deeper pockets, they've been the most generous schools in the country when it comes to need-based aid. And so that's a little bit of the background. Now, as far as this lawsuit goes, I see two things. One thing I think feels bogus to me, and one thing I think feels like it's legitimate and it could really stir up a lot of trouble. Which one do you want me to take first, Dave? The one that feels bogus, the one that feels legit?
This is bogus first, then legit.
Yeah, so the part that feels bogus to me is where it implies that students were being precluded or prohibited from getting better packages because the schools were sort of colluding amongst each other. And I don't see that. My experience has been that admission officers are super aggressive when they want somebody, and they try everything they do to find the most creative ways to give the absolute best packages they possibly can because they hate to lose people to their competitors. And even at the highest levels, Dave, I remember a conversation I had with a former Harvard financial aid officer. And she shared with me how when Harvard lost a kid over money, and the school came back and showed, look, this is the package that this other school gave. If it was coming from one of their competitors, they'd empty the bank account and say, look, we're not going to lose over money. Now, that's only for someone they deem as a competitor. They're not going to do it for some school where it's like the top kid in their applicant pool and they got some super duper merit offer. No offense to Central Michigan, but you can't waive your merit scholarship from Central Michigan and think Harvard's matching it. So I'm not saying that. But so I have not experienced that. I've experienced the opposite. I've experienced where they say that it's completely a need-based award. And sometimes you look at it and you're like, come on. Because schools that only give need-based aid, they're really at a disadvantage to schools that give merit-based aid. Schools that give merit-based aid can just give you what you want. And a lot of times the schools that give need-based aid, they don't like to lose kids. So I've actually seen the opposite there. I've seen schools stretch the definition of need-based aid to really bring in a kid they really want. So that's the part to me that feels shaky. Now, the part that feels legitimate, and they could be in trouble here. So Dave, remember how we've talked before that is it really possible that schools are need blind? Like, are they really need blind when they're not need blind? Most of them, even that claim that they're need blind, are not need blind for international students. Yeah. They're also not need blind when they go to the wait list, and they're also not need blind for transfers. Furthermore, there are other schools that so badly want to be able to be in that club of 77 schools that say they're need blind and also say that they meet financial need. Actually, it's even less that say we're completely need blind and meet full financial need. That number is actually in the 30s. So many people want to sort of be able to be in that club because, one, of the prestige of being in that club, and two, because it's all the wealthiest and most prestigious schools in the country, and also and so they want that association, but also because that's a really powerful thing to say to a student when you're recruiting them. We're going to meet your full financial need and we're need blind. Wow, that's pretty cool. So in order to sort of be in that club, I've seen a lot of corners cut. And one of the biggest ways I see it is how they calculate home equity. So, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but it's ridiculous for a school to have no limits on your home equity. What that basically means is if you're let's say you're in California and let's say you bought a house at $300,000 and now it's shot up to $700,000 and you make $90,000 a year. Well, a school that uses all of your home equity might turn around and expect you to pay $55,000 for college and you make $90,000 before taxes because they're using all your home equity. And so I've seen people cut corners to be in that group. So part of this lawsuit says you claim you're need blind and you're really not. And I think they're wide open to accusations and legitimate accusations that there's going to be plenty of evidence to show that need blind is a farce. Every school has to report on their 990 the amount of financial aid that they give away. It's a huge line item in their budget, and it's impossible really to balance your books without managing that to a certain degree. So I don't know where this is going. I do think someone's being opportunistic and looking for a way of dinging some of the wealthiest schools. I'm not convinced anybody personally was harmed when I look at these 5 plaintiffs for Illinois. I really, once again, I haven't seen all the documents in the suit, but it feels to me more like you're going after them on a technicality that you claim you're need blind and you're really not, than that personally harmed somebody. But what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, there is sort of a Michael Avenatti feel to this, let's
blast from the past.
That's right. Let's just add into the Stormy Daniels. And see what we get.
It does have that feel. One word you just crystallized what I said for the last 7 minutes.
Well,
Michael
thank goodness,
Avenatti.
thank goodness, listening audience, I did not have to explain to Mark who Stormy Daniels was.
Yeah.
Since
Hey, I do
since this is
follow politics.
this is a PG rated podcast here.
I'm brushing up on my movies. I watched High Crimes,
Oh,
and now I watch The Fugitive.
oh, geez. Now, which one did you saw the one with Harrison Ford?
Harrison Ford.
Well, I'm glad you got to it like 25 years later.
I'm trying to get brownie points and you're busting on me.
You must have picked that off of the Amazon Free Prime movie distribution network.
I hit Karen's Netflix subscription up now that I've used Netflix for the first time in 2021.
They're like, ooh, someone actually pulled that movie up in the last 25 years. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I personally, look, maybe by just shining a light on it, it just will make the schools tread a little bit more carefully and at least pay a bit more than lip service to keeping things more neat blind. I did want to say one thing about the home equity. That's a dangerous place to go, considering that home prices have just skyrocketed over the last 2 years. I mean, over 50% in many major markets like Atlanta. So if they're using your home equity, which is essentially not very illiquid, and saying, hey, you're worth an extra $200,000, give it to us on your tuition, that could really hurt a lot of people. So
yeah, and that's been happening for a really, really long time. That's part of the CSS formula. It's just that what a lot of schools have done to protect the situation from happening that I mentioned before is they cap it. And so a very common cap you'll see, the most generous schools cap your home equity at 2% at 2 times income. So what would that mean? That person that made $90,000, we're only going to use $180,000 of your home equity. And so if your houses were $700, from $180 to $700 doesn't go into the formula. That's going to reduce what you're asked to pay by about $25,000 per year.
but there's home equity after your outstanding mortgage, correct?
Well, it's equity, right? So it looks at what the home is worth minus what you owe. So it's like,
Right.
But let's not get too into the weeds on that. Let's go back to your point. So I don't see admission officers are focused on the kid. They're not thinking about money. When admission officers are reading a file, they're not thinking this person can pay, this person can't. That happens when the powers that be above tell you money's a concern, we're over budget. That's just, this is not how admission officer typically thinks. But schools do have policies, and the policies can be, look, transfer applicants, we just don't have as much money for you. International students, sorry, we don't have the money for you. Wait list, sorry, we're over budget, so we need to go to people who can pay. So it kind of comes in regard to that. I don't know where this is going, Dave, but I will say this. Let's speak more macro. There's people are really there's an aggressiveness going after college admissions right now. Like you saw it in that lawsuit in 2019. You see it in affirmative action, because affirmative action is basically saying you're restricting the ability of the school to best determine how they can shape their own student body. It's a heavy hand. And another place where you saw it is in 2018, legislation was enacted for the first time to tax endowments. That had never been done before.
Yeah.
And schools have to tax endowments. So it's a difficult time. I was talking to a former admission officer from one of these schools 2 weeks ago. And he said to me, boy, it's a really difficult time to be in higher ed. And he quoted this particular lawsuit because he worked at one of these schools. And he also quoted what's the affirmative action and a number of initiatives. Like it's just a really, really, really challenging time. When you couple that with the public's a little more cynicism toward college, college is under scrutiny right now. It's a tough time, but hey, like the stock market, they'll survive.
Yeah, they will. But you're right. It is. I would say it's more. I think it's politically hostile to colleges. I think there's a political section of our government that has a vested interest in portraying colleges as the bad guy for their own political gain. So yeah, I would second
Well, I would
that.
agree with you, Dave. And I'm sure you're following what's happening. People like Toni Morrison being stripped from books that people can read. Even Martin Luther King, his speeches, legislation being passed in certain places. So it's part of a broader attempt to say colleges are liberal and we don't want liberal thinking getting into the minds of people. So we're going to try to just stop it right on the front end to produce some more conservative electorate.
Absolutely. And I'm just to send out there. Anytime you have a state legislature which will not be named and a governor which will not be named trying to pass legislation to outlaw any teaching that makes people feel uncomfortable, well, then let's go back to the 1950s and review what McCarthyism is to see what the colleges are.
Man, I need to give you a Williams rant, man, and I need to let you call names. What's with this will not be raid, man? We're not the political PC podcast over here.
All right, well, it's a certain state that's south of Georgia with a governor whose initial starts with D. And that's all I'm going to say about that.
Dave's saying that because I called DeSantis a knucklehead once, and we got this really angry email that came in and said, how dare you, basically it said, how dare you call DeSantis a knucklehead unless you want to rename your podcast your college-bound liberal kid. So Dave's stepping on toes or tiptoeing around the tulips over there.
That's right. That's right. We won't let you know that Kenny and Charles don't like the Knicks.
Awesome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Lisa, take it away. Question from a listener. We got two today.
All right. The first question is from Jennifer from Virginia. And she asks, living in the Northern Virginia area, many parents feel when their child is applying to Virginia's highly selective schools like William and Mary and UVA, that there is a bias against Northern Virginia high schools. I've heard from several parents that there's a quota system and they only let in a tiny number from each school, even if they are all well above the middle 50% of applicants. Have you found this to be true?
So like everything in admissions, there's always a lot of nuance in there. Like there are obviously schools that use a grid method, that use, guaranteed admissions, use formulaic admissions and number crunch. And those schools like, Iowa until recently and so many others, Penn State, so many others don't do that, right? It's all about number crunching. But for the most part, it's true. And if you go back and listen to Gregory Roberts, who's over the admission office at UVA, I interviewed him and he brought this up. He brought it up in the interview. He talked about the difficulty of attracting students from rural parts of the state and how they don't want UVA to be all dominated by people from the northern part of the state. And so they go to great lengths to have every person represented. And you'll see that consistently, like in Georgia, there's a valedictorian and salutatorian policy that if you're the valedictorian or the salutatorian, then you are automatically admitted to Georgia Tech or Georgia. And that's intentionally designed to encourage some people in rural parts of the state to bring them out and let them, because a lot of times they're intimidated by those schools. Mm-hmm. And so the question, why would this be true? First of all, state funding. For state schools, everybody's paying taxes, and they don't want all the benefits to go to what they call the privilege. And I realize not everybody's privileged in NOVA. NOVA is an acronym for Northern Virginia, but it is. It's the highest concentration of wealth in the state. Those suburbs, all those towns around in the northern part of the state, whether it's McLean or you're talking about Loudoun, Alexandria, and there's a bunch of them. They're wealthy, compared to other parts of the state. And so the least represented parts of the state, the places where you'll find more first gen, kids' parents never gone to college, they're not generally going to be able to compete off traditional metrics with kids from the northern part of the state. Why? Because highly educated parents and parents of income and parents who expose their kids to all kinds of enrichment opportunities, it just leads to huge advantages compared to people that aren't coming from that education. And that's pretty indisputable and irrefutable. Mm-hmm. And schools are going to have the mindset that talent is everywhere. And so for them, it's going to be a fairness argument. you have so many advantages. You have highly educated parents, you have income, you have resources, you have exposure, travel, all kinds of things, clubs, summer programs, enrichment, other places don't. And so part of it is a fairness argument, and part of it is a diversity argument. The diversity and not diversity in the sense of race, because we're talking mostly rural versus non-rural, right? And diversity meaning like what perspective is not going to be in the classroom because so many people are coming from one concentrated part of the state where obviously there's lots of individuals, but people do tend to think differently in Northern Virginia than they do in, Roanoke or other parts of the state, Harrisonburg and just lots of areas. They just do. And this is pretty consistent. So I mentioned Georgia does it. I mentioned Virginia does it. I mean, right now we're interviewing Gary Clark at UCLA. The UCs have what they call eligibility in local context, ELC, and that means they have the ability to look at, have you been a superstar in your context? And that's also the same thing Texas does. Texas plan, their 6% plan. If you're a superstar in your context, we're going to take that into consideration. And so if you're coming from rural part of East or West Texas compared to a place like Plano or Richardson, then that's going to be factored in. So, and I mentioned public schools, privates do it just as much, if not more, because they're the ones that usually do holistic admissions the most. And this is definitely a part of holistic admission. So thoughts, Lisa?
I knew that when we moved to Chapel Hill, that probably meant my kids would not have a very good shot at getting into UNC Chapel Hill or Duke. I mean, and you just kind of have to accept that going in, unless your kid is at the very top of their class. They're not going to be able to go to those schools. And I do think that's fair because the schools here are, more well-funded than they are in a lot of the other areas of North Carolina. And, I do think that it's fair. I know my kids will be fine no matter what, right? Because they, like you said, they have educated parents and they have extracurriculars and they have opportunities that these other kids don't have. But I think that is pretty typical in most places that happens.
It is. This is the standard. And actually, you brought up a really, really, really important point I didn't bring up. Like I talked about educated parents. I talked about parents of means. I talked about ability to do summer enrichment and programs and tutoring. But you brought up something very important, which is you're coming from better school systems. You have better K-12 schools for 14 years. Nobody in the Nova schools would ever want to trade their school systems for the rural Virginia schools. They would never do it. They probably wouldn't live there just for the schools alone. So that's a huge part of the advantage that I actually didn't mention was very important. So I'm glad you brought that in. So I know it hurts and I know it feels like, the deck is stacked against me and it can be a little discouraging, especially when you see how strong you have to be to get into a place like a UVA or William and Mary, or in your case, the schools in the Triangle, UNC and NC State. But at least we agree that it's fair and it is just and it's completely understandable and it's also normal, and you'll see this state by state by state by state. We just happen to pick Texas, California, Georgia, and Virginia for examples, but we could have gone, and North Carolina. We picked like 5 examples, but we could add another 30.
Right. And I do think, education is supposed to be the great equalizer in this country. And this is a way of, balancing things. My kids probably, will have lots of different colleges they can choose from. They'll be able to afford to go to them. They'll, have parents who've been through college. It's just that it's not even a comparable situation. And I think it's important to try to find talent where we can and bring it in and make it grow. I mean, that's the only way I think we're all going to be okay is if we have every person who is smart, being fully educated and being on deck to solve all the problems that our society is going to face. So I'm in support of that policy.
Well, you brought another really good point up, the whole thing about education being the great equalizer. Like a lot of schools see it as their mission to be part of an engine of social mobility. That's part of what they see as their educational mission as the institution, to try to change generations that may have been locked in poverty or have not been exposed to education. And if you can break in, and that's why schools really value first gen so much, because if you can break in and get that first person to graduate, you not only can impact that person's life, but you can impact, their lineage in perpetuity. And a lot of times, and look, my parents are both educated. My parents are both teachers, and my father was an assistant vice president. So we're both, beneficiaries of this, but we both think that it's really fair and just. And so, I think we've talked it out enough.
All right, good.
Let's go to the second question.
Okay, now this question I like. I'm curious to see how you're going to answer it. How do I choose a college? And this is from a student in New Jersey.
It's so funny because, you get all these hard questions. And then this one seems so simple, but when I was asked it at first, it hit me like a brick right between the face. It was like so simple, but so profound.
Mm-hmm.
So what I say, the very first thing is, and this is how I answered it, and to the student in New Jersey, because this was actually taken from a presentation I did to a group of students at New Jersey, but I'm pulling it here because I thought it was such a good question. So how do I pick a college? It starts with the I. What do I mean by that? This is custom work. At least I was looking back at the last 15 sets of twins I've worked with, and none of them went to the same school. None of them. Now, I've certainly have worked with twins that gone to the same school, but the last 15 sets of twins have not gone to the same school. Why? Because you're different and you're unique. And so this is custom work. So it starts with the I. Now, what does that mean? You got to know yourself. Before you can embark on this process, you have to know yourself. So Lisa and I together, we like to do a battery of tests. That's a starting point, reveals interests and some aptitudes. Then different experiences. Having exposure to different experiences helps you to understand yourself. And then just listening and reflecting. And, one thing Antonoff said I like, Stephen Antonoff, when I interviewed him on the podcast, he does this much more now than when he started out. He tells people basically, go up in the mountains and just think. Get in tune with yourself. So the first thing is it starts with understanding yourself, because how can you meet your own needs without knowing what your needs are? So that's the first thing that I'll say. Someone I'm working with recently, and they've completed our questionnaire before we had a meeting, and they said, this questionnaire is a bear. I don't know if we're going to be able to do the whole thing. Are there any questions that are more important than others? I said, yeah, there's one that's really important. What are the 3 to 5 most important things to you as a student and a parent? So that I want people to have thought through that to some extent. And that's hard to do just completely in a vacuum. That's why I like to get you on as many different campuses as you can. And a lot of times the pistons start firing off and you start thinking and seeing, can I see myself here? And sometimes it comes to you that way. But so it's a combination of the reflection piece and the exposure piece, as well as the study piece. Once you do that, you're looking for a match. It's all about a match, and ideally a match in 5 ways. So an academic match, what does that mean? Is it strong in my area of interest, my major? Is the difficulty level what I'm looking for? Is the teaching style conducive to how I learn? And that refers to in-classroom, but also things like experiential learning, like capstone projects, internships, research opportunities, co-ops, study away, study abroad. Are the academic interests of the kids similar to mine? If you like living learning communities, does it provide that? What about the class size? What about the school size? What about the campus setting? All of those things. All these things are part of the academic program. What about the academic opportunities outside of the classroom? What about the reputation of the school? We don't have time to list all of these things, but first you're looking for an academic match, then a social match. And to me, that's really, is it fun? And can I find my tribe here? Mm-hmm. That's pretty simple. And then I like to say an emotional match, because what's an emotional match? You'll like this, Lisa. Is it healthy? It can be fun, but not healthy. Some things are fun, but they're not healthy.
So true.
So, yeah.
You need Doritos.
Yes, exactly. A lot of things, So is it healthy? So that's important, the emotional match. Then we have to look at the financial match. What are we talking about here? Is it affordable for me and my parents? What will my loan debt be like? Is it going to be too onerous? Will I have to work too many hours? Is that going to be too taxing? What's the opportunity cost? What else, other opportunities am I missing? And then the last match I like to look at is what I call the outcomes match. So here I'm talking about things like, what's the job placement? What's the compensation? What's the network like? How much time will it take to graduate? And then there's some things that you could kind of say, you could throw them in outcomes match or academic match. You could kind of fit in either bucket. Like, will my speaking improve? Will my writing improve? Will my critical thinking improve? I don't know if you want to call that an outcomes match or an academic match. So there's some overlap there. And then the final thing is just do you and be you, because so many wrong decisions are made because someone's trying to impress a girlfriend or a peer at their school or a classmate or even a parent. So that's my answer. Anything you want to add?
Oh my God, I cannot believe you had such a wonderfully succinct pithy explanation of that. I think I can't believe
I've never been told I'm pithy ever.
I don't think you maybe have ever been pithy before, Mark. But
and guess what? I realized you've probably forgiven me now for our last conversation.
I was never mad, but I just think that was such a great summary. And I really do think that, people really need to do themselves and try not to worry about peer pressure or what their parents think. And I mean, as we know, the science tells us that people are so heavily manipulated by those factors, but those things aren't going to make you happy for the next 4 years. Liking where you are and liking what you do, that's what makes you happy. And that, I hope, if kids can try to put that first, then they will, really set themselves up for success.
Yeah, and I don't think it's unrealistic to expect to get matches in all of them. Now, having said that, I always tell people your personal home is not perfect, and a school community is just a bunch of homes coming together. Your high school is not perfect, so please don't expect utopia from your college. So I'm not talking about perfection, but you can get an academic match and your social match and an emotional match and a financial match and an outcomes match. I do believe that is highly attainable. And I think that's a realistic goal, and that's what I think people need to look for. But it starts with knowing yourself and doing you and being you. So, you know what? I think sometimes good college counseling is completely consistent with good mental health psychology counseling. I think this is one time when they just kind of intersect really nicely.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, it's not always easy to know yourself, even as a grown-up. And to ask you, like a 16-year-old, be like, well, figure out what you like and what you want. And they kind of look at you like, lady, I have no idea how to do that. But I do think the college process is a really great way to start learning about yourself. And, by seeing what the options are, you can be like, oh, I like that. Oh, I do not like that. I'll never forget when Lily and I went to visit Florida Southern, and it was an honors day interview day. And so they were talking about the honors dorm, and they were saying, well, you're going to love the honors dorm. It's so quiet. There aren't many parties there at all. And Lily just looks at me and goes, I'm out. It was very clear.
I know where she got the I'm out from. And flashback to Sawani in the dresses.
Right. But, she that was not a good social fit for her. I mean, it might have been good in a lot of other ways, great school in a lot of ways, but socially, those were not going to be her people. She wants to have the loud party and be at the loud party. So, and I guess it's good that she knows that about herself. It makes me worry a little bit about what I'm paying for. But anyway, another story.
No, it's finding, we call it finding your tribe, Finding your tribe is very important. And I haven't used this term this much, but we used to use it doing college counseling and boarding school. Is the school singing at me? Is it singing at me? A school can be like a magnet. It either repels or it draws you in. Some of these things are subjective. Some of these things are going to be feel things. It's not always going to be heady.
Right.
It's a combination of the head and the heart.
Exactly.
And
so
the
true.
two of them come together. And a lot of times your instincts are really reflecting who you are, even if you can't articulate it.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I find this so often with so many people I talk to in my clinical practice. If you really get down to what they really think, they know what they like. They know who's nice to them and who's not nice to them. But there are all these layers that have been built up by society that prevent them from realizing that. Most people, I think, really do have that sense of where they should go and who they should do it with, but it gets obscured.
It's hard. When you were saying it's not always easy to find yourself, I was reminded of this guy named Steve from Chicago. He's a guy that encouraged me to start my practice. So he just would not take no for an answer. Like, you need to do this. And I said, no, you need to do this. And then I was talking to him one time, and I was like, you know what? I could not be happier. I'm like a fish in water. I love it. And I'll never forget, he said to me, wow, I'm 46 and I still haven't found my passion. But the reason why it hit me is it made me realize just how it's not the easiest thing to do.
No. And it changes. I mean,
yes.
What your passion can change over the course of your life. I think you and I are both examples of this.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. That was good. That was good, Lisa.
All right. Have a great day.
Good stuff. We started with round 3 and we ended on a good note. Now I feel like you're not over there cussing at me and
I just don't want to do round 4 because no.
Round 3 was the last one. Round 3 wore me out.
Next time we're going to fight about something different, like about Doogie Howser or Seinfeld, and which one is better.
No, not that one either. Can't get away from him. He's making it into every episode these days.
I know. Like Neil Patrick Harris
right.
thinks you're his new publicist now.
No, guess what? I ordered a really big TV, and I'm going back and I'm watching some movies now. I watched this movie called High Crimes with Ashley Judd, and I'm gonna start to impress you and Dave with a little bit of my contemporary knowledge.
All right.
I'm gonna get there. You'll see.
Okay.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed Gary Clark talking about demystifying the waitlist. Now we transition and talk about UCLA. So Gary gives a high-level overview of who UCLA is. And then the approach we take with Gary is similar to what we did with Courtney Hatch-Blauvelt and Michael Ireland. You sent in questions, and I asked him your questions. And so Gary answers your questions. He explains what comprehensive review is. He shares a few unique things that UCLA does that some of the other UCs don't do when evaluating an applicant. He tells us what ELC is and how it works at UCLA. And Gary discusses whether grade inflation at a high school is something they look at or is an A and A no matter where the student is coming from. Listen and enjoy. Gary, thanks for coming back. Appreciate your insights last week, and let's do an all UCLA conversation today. Does that work for you?
That sounds good. Let's do it.
Yeah, so we've been trying something a little lately. I've been telling our listeners, I don't need to be the one asking all the questions. Why don't you send in your questions, and we'll ask your questions. And that's what we're going to do for the most part today. Have 6 or 7 questions that we're sending in, a mixture of college counselors and parents. But before we do, I know you've been asked a million times to give the elevator speech. Why don't you just give the basic overview of UCLA? I think that'll set a nice context before we get into questions.
Sure. So I would describe UCLA. I'd start by saying, obviously, we're a public institution. We're one of 9 undergraduate campuses within the UC system. We are actually the largest campus in terms of enrollment, but we are the smallest campus in terms of physical footprint of our campus. So we are, I guess, what you would consider in many ways a pretty traditional, large public research university. Very highly regarded. I think a place that has really come by its reputation in an earnest way. We offer students a really, I think, unique experience as an undergraduate in that they have the opportunity to really live on campus. We generally, many of our incoming freshmen will live on campus for their first 3 years. We want students to have that residential experience. The academic breadth of what UCLA has to offer is really second to none. We have over 125 majors and 90 minors for students to choose from. And many of our students pursue more than one program. It's rare that you'll hear a student say, oh, well, I'm studying psychology and that's it. It's often a double major or a major and a minor or a major and 2 minors. And I think that's recognition of this is likely not the terminal degree for many students. A lot of students will go on to advanced degrees. And we're really trying to prepare students for careers of the future that may not even exist today. And so it's about learning how to think. It's about learning how to connect ideas across disciplinary lines. And I think UCLA really facilitates that with the kind of academic program that we offer. Research is something that I hope students are interested in if they're looking at UCLA. We really want to get students in the labs and out in the field with faculty doing research, collecting data, creating new knowledge alongside our faculty. That's part of the learning process as well. It's not just listen, regurgitate on an exam or a paper and move forward. It's about kind of creating that learning process and being a partner in that we really want to offer to our students. And then just engagement on campus. I mean, I think we really want our students to take advantage of the well over 1,000 clubs and organizations, enjoy the remarkable athletics programs at UCLA, really brings Bruins together and adds a real sense of enthusiasm and excitement to the undergraduate experience. Study abroad, which is something that's very popular among our students. And then I think the last thing, and really a critical one, is LA. I mean, I think we are in one of the most dynamic, diverse cities in the country and around the world. And our chancellor will often say that, if you come to UCLA and all you do is you stay in your residence hall room and you go to class and you wake up and do it all over again, it's like going to Paris and never leaving your hotel room. Like you're not going to get all the LA part of the experience that makes this such a distinctive, campus. So I think that's something that our students really take advantage of. So it's an amazing place. I think the thing I love more than probably anything, and I look forward to getting back on campus to actually see this firsthand, is students seem happy. I mean, we're not perfect. I'm not trying to paint too rosy a picture here, but
Right.
when you walk around campus and interact with students, they tend to have smiles on their faces. They seem eager to get where they're going. And I think that's one of those intangible things that really tells you that the students are getting the kind of experience that they're hoping for at UCLA.
No, that's great. That's great. That's great. So our first question comes from a college counselor from California, and it's a lengthy one, but one I'm sure you hear quite frequently. It says, walk us through the holistic review process and the 13 factors that the UCs consider when making decisions.
Sure. So first, to just highlight kind of what they're referring to. So the faculty for the University of California set admission policy for the entire UC system. And they've basically approved what used to be 14, but is now 13 elements of what we call comprehensive review. And you can look this up. Just look up UC comprehensive review, and it'll be the first link that you see. And it basically is a list of the things that faculty have designated as things that we can consider in evaluating a student for admission to the University of California. And none of these things will surprise you. I mean, there are things like academic performance, rigor of the high school program, engagement and leadership outside of the classroom, these types of things that you would typically expect that colleges and universities would be looking at. The 14th that went away was standardized testing, and that is, we're not considering SAT or ACT in the admission process, for this year through the fall 2024 admission cycle, at least, and then we'll see what happens beyond that. So what we do in the holistic review process is similar to I would say kind of what we did at some of my other colleges and universities where I worked. We're looking at the student's comprehensive application. It's not a numbers game. It's if all we cared about were numbers, we could fill our class with an Excel spreadsheet in an hour. But we're really interested in who the students are. And for the UC application, there's some important things to note, and especially for UCLA. We ask students to self-report their grades and their curriculum in high school. So they're telling us, 9th through 12th, all the classes that they're taking or plan to take, whether those courses are honors, AP, IB, college classes that they're taking, and then the grades that they've earned in those courses. The UC GPA is based exclusively on sophomore and junior year. And we are interested in freshman year because we want to see the trajectory of the courses that the student has taken, in senior year because we want to see the rigor of that senior program in our evaluation of the application. Want to hear about what students are doing outside of class. What are they engaged in? And I always tell students, it's not the length of the resume that matters. It's really the depth of commitment to the things that you do that really stands out to us. So it's not about volume. It's about richness of the experience and how much you're really pouring yourself into whatever that thing might be. And it might be a club or organization, might be athletics, might be school newspaper. You might work part-time. You might take care of a family member at home. All of those things, volunteer work, faith-based group, like any of those things. I wouldn't value any of those as being more or less valuable than another. It's about what do you care about and what are you passionate about and what do you pour yourself into? Because what we want is a campus full of enthusiastic students who are going to take advantage of the opportunities available to them and commit and really get involved and stay involved. And so it's not about volume. It's about that depth of commitment that we see in the activities. And then we ask 8 personal insight questions, and we ask students to respond to 4 of them. No more than 350 words in each response. So it's kind of a get to the point, kind of response. And it doesn't matter which 4 you choose, totally up to the student. But what we're looking for out of those is really just, if I had to distill it down to one word, it's authenticity. Like at UCLA, we don't collect letters of recommendation. We don't interview students. So the only opportunity we have to hear the student voice in the application, outside of them reporting things in square boxes about I did this for this number of years and I took this class and got this grade, is what they share with us in those personal insight questions. So I think it's not about is the comma in the right place and that type of thing. It's more about content. It's about really us knowing that student better at the end of reading these personal insight question responses than we did before. And if the student can accomplish that, then they've done a good job in evaluating or in responding to those questions. And then it's really all those things together that we evaluate and read and ultimately determine how compelling we find that student to be in the admission process. And here's the part, and this is a long answer, but I'll wrap it up here. Here's the challenge that we face as an institution like UCLA. The quality of students that chooses to apply to us is off the charts. To the point where we could fill potentially 3+ freshman classes and have little to no fall off in the quality of students that we admit and enroll. So we're not choosing between, great and pretty good. Like, we've got a volume of students who are just top performers that far surpasses the volume that we can admit. And so it's really about digging deep into what that student shares with us in the application to determine who are those students that we might identify for admission. But, it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of sympathy for admission folks out there, but this is really, really challenging work. And every freshman application is read at least twice before a decision is made. So this is a thorough, holistic commitment to evaluating a student thoroughly before we make a final admission decision.
No, that was great. I appreciated the comprehensive nature of your answer.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, special thanks to all of you who send in recommended resources, some of which I am not familiar with, and I learn new resources, and that is the case for our recommended resource for episode 211. You all remember Linda Depker, who told us how she masterfully uses Facebook groups to learn about individual colleges that her kid is looking at. Well, she sent in a fantastic resource, and it's collegehunch.com. College, HUNCH.com. Linda likes to use College Hunch when she's traveling, she's on the road, and that's because it's so incredibly user-friendly on your phone. So what is College Hunch? Well, it's an interactive college guide that fits right in the palm of your hand, and it's built so you can browse, sort, and organize a treasure trove of the latest data on thousands of colleges. And it's got great charts too. It's very visually appealing. So what is some of the kinds of information that's there? Well, GPA, ACT, SAT, percentiles, student demographics, profiles of schools, admission requirements, deadlines, including priority deadlines, financial aid stats, tuition fees, postgraduate salary data, the weather, contact information for main offices like the admission office, and then they have a section on similar schools that are curated based on a variety of factors, which is always interesting. I love when schools have that. There's a lot of fast facts and there's a section called Notable Alumni. But what makes it great is just how well it's organized to fit on the phone. They really arrange this data so that it's just very user-friendly from the phone. And it's always nice when you've got the great visuals and the great charts. So our recommended resource, collegehunch.com. Now return to my interview with Gary Clark. So we know in general, you've got the UC app and these 13 factors are decided, not by you, above you and the powers that be. But are there some aspects for individuality within UCLA compared to other UCs? Because I know, for example, at Berkeley, there's a few little things that they sometimes do that maybe some of the other UCs don't do. Is there anything at all that you would say UCLA does within those 13 factors that may be different from some of the other UC schools?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have a great response, only because I don't have a deep understanding of how each individual campus goes about their review process and selection process. I mean, there are a couple of things I would say, like there are a couple of campuses that may ask for letters of recommendation at some point in their process for a small number of students. We don't do that.
That was one of the things
the only programs, I think, like, in our theater, film, and television program, they may ask for a letter to support the student's talent, that goes directly to the school. My office never sees it. We don't evaluate it. It's evaluated by the faculty in that program. But that's a very limited number. So that's one thing that some campuses might do that we do not. We do, as we move through the review process and those first two reviews of the application, we at times might identify an application that we'd like to hear a little bit more from the student. So on occasion, we may reach out to the student and ask them to provide some additional information to us. And that's not indicative of anything. It's not that if a student doesn't get that, it means we're not interested. That's certainly not the case. It's really just an opportunity for us, if we hear something maybe in one of the personal insight questions or something like that, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about something, we may ask a student to respond to us and go on a web form that we provide to provide some additional information. I wouldn't call out anything as being really dramatically different from what I perceive that other campuses are doing. But again, I don't have that deep knowledge of how they conduct their review process.
Sure. Gary, could you provide a couple examples of times when you have reached out and asked for a little more elaboration, just to sort of concretize that for our listeners?
So I will answer that, but I'll be a little evasive because I don't want to say this scenario and think students should somehow create that kind of circumstance in their application to lead to us asking for them to share more information. It really can be a wide variety of things. It might be some circumstances. It might be something that happened during the student's high school career. It might be some significant commitment they have to something they're doing outside of class that clearly is a heavy pull on their time, and we want to hear a little bit more about that. So it really could be a variety of things. I don't want to get too specific because, again, I don't want a student to think that somehow they need to find a way to include that in their app. But it's really just can be a number of different things that just leads us to say, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that from the student. And they're given the chance to reply. They don't have to. It's not required. It doesn't hurt their chances of being admitted if they don't reply. But it's just an opportunity for them to maybe share a little bit more information about some particular circumstance that they might have, talked about a bit in their application, and we'd like to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, that's helpful. I can understand why, you don't want to be too specific and the inferences people could make from that.
Right.
One thing you never mentioned of the 13 is ELC, right? Eligibility and local context. Can you talk to our listeners about what that is and how that fleshes itself out in your read?
Sure. So ELC is a California specific thing. It stands for eligible in the local context. And the University of California essentially says that if a student is in the top 9% of their high school graduating class in a participating high school, because not every high school in California participates in this, then they are guaranteed admission to the University of California. Not necessarily to the campus of their choice, but they're guaranteed admission to the University of California. So that is a factor that we can consider in the evaluation process, that if a student is identified as ELC, and that's the application essentially identifies that based on what the student is inputting into the application. So the student will know at the point of filling out the app whether they are ELC or not. And that is something that we consider as a positive part of the review process. It's not a guarantee for us. I would say of our California residents, probably 84% of the California residents that we admit are ELC. But it's not a guarantee of admission to UCLA. But if a student applies to multiple campuses and they're not admitted, they would get a guaranteed offer admission from a campus. In many cases, it might be UC Merced that provides that admission offer, but it's a guarantee for admission to the UC system.
Well, there'll be some reasons, Gary, that a high school would choose not to participate in that. It would seem to me that there'd be nothing but upside to a school participating in the ELC process.
I don't
high
know.
School.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think to be a part of it requires that high schools, I believe, provide a good deal of data and information to the University of California to be a part of that consideration. But it's a good question. I don't know that I could speculate on an answer. It's get one of your high school counselors on and see if they can give you a good answer to that
question. That's fair. So here's another question from another California college counselor. Is there comparison applicant data that is used when you're reading in school groups? And if so, how far does it go back?
Well, so we don't really read at my campus. We don't really read in school groups. What that basically means is there are some colleges and universities that have like territory managers that read all the applications from a given high school or a given region or a given state or whatever the case may be. We don't approach our reading that way, and it really just has to do with volume. It's just not feasible. I mean, we have high schools in California where we get 500 plus applications just from that high school.
From one high school.
From one high school,
Ouch.
yeah. So it doesn't really work for us in terms of the arithmetic of it. But what we can do and what we do as a part of the review process is we have a lot of historical data, for students that have applied from high schools, for years in the past. But we look a lot at the last 3 years. The reason that we contextualize the review in that way is because we want to understand the context of what we're looking at in terms of the student's academic performance. What kind of curriculum is available to the student at that school? Number of honors, AP, IB courses that might be available to the student in their high school curriculum has an impact on how many of those classes that they might take. Some schools offer no APs. Some schools offer 25 plus APs. What we want to understand is what kind of curriculum is available to the student in their school setting, and to what degree have they taken advantage of some of those rigorous courses. And then to see how that stacks up based on what we've seen from applicants from that high school, in the past. It allows us to understand, there are some schools where, a 3.8 unweighted GPA might put you in the top decile. Like you're a top performing student in that school. There are other schools where that might put you in the fourth decile. And what we want to understand is that not every school grades the same. Not every school has the same kind of philosophy. What we want to understand is in the context of this school and kind of the grading practices there and the curriculum there, that allows us to better evaluate the student's academic performance than just looking at a number and assuming we know what that number represents, because that number can mean something a little bit different at different high schools based on what's available and based on how they might grade in that particular setting. So that kind of context and historical data, helps us to take a deeper dive and I think do a more accurate review of a student's application.
I don't know if you do this or not, but another Clark who we've had on the podcast twice, Rick Clark, who I know knows you, in Georgia Tech, they build out statistical models, and it's public. It's on their website under their admission snapshot section that shows the school students that have come from this particular school. This has been their incoming freshman GPA at our school. Now, they only publish it if there's a minimum of at least 10 students in the last 3 years. But they're able to look and say, okay, and I've spent hours geeking out and nerding out on that data because, it's fascinating to see that, a 4.23 at this school translates to a 2.91 at Georgia Tech. Do you guys do any of that sort of analysis where you're looking at how average GPAs from various schools to sense to look at grade inflation that way?
No, we don't really compare high schools in that way. I think what we're really, the goal of that data and presenting that data to our readers is to really understand the context of the student's academic performance. Not to say that this high school is better than this high school. It's really just to understand the context of their performance, because some students have the ability to choose where they go to high school. Some students don't. They go to the high school down the road, and that high school may not be a well-resourced school, may not have the kind of curriculum that some other high schools have. And what we want to do is ensure that we don't penalize that student for going to whatever the neighborhood high school might be. What we want to understand is in the context of that school and the opportunities available to that student, did they excel? Did they achieve within the context of the opportunities available to them? So it's not about comparing one school to another. It's about just really being able to understand what the data is telling us for a student at a given high school.
Thanks for that. Friends, we got a lot of really good feedback about the debate. A lot of you liked Lisa and I going at it, sharing our views. And one thing that I always try to do is basically emulate what I admire and eschew what I disdain. And so how does that apply? Well, example. I look at a lot of financial stuff on YouTube, and sometimes when I'm on YouTube, I'll be listening to this really interesting person, and they're like, you want my information? Join my Patreon. And it kind of bothers me. So I'm like, you're on YouTube. You're giving out free information. So I don't know. I just didn't feel comfortable only having part 3 for people that have made a donation. I want everybody to be able to hear it. So we decided to do part 3. And guess what? I've actually been trash talking Lisa and even
It's terrible, people.
Why don't you share what I'm talking about, Lisa?
Oh, well, I guess one of our co-hosts had sent an email to all of us saying Lisa wins and that I should be the president of all things college admissions. And Mark took that as a challenge. And he said, listen, Lisa, I know how you work and I'm coming for you. And, you're going to go down. And I'm looking at the thing. I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, I've never been talked to like this before. I wasn't in team sports or anything like that. So I was confused and I showed it to my husband. He's like, oh, that just means you're part of the gang. That means he likes you. He's trash talking you. It's a compliment.
It is. Okay. That's how I talk with Dave. You got Dave treatment. You got Dave treatment. That means you're like totally uncomfortable with you. That's how we grew up. So.
Well, now I know. And if I send some back to you your way, you know that I'll feel comfortable with you. So.
Exactly. It works both ways. If you want to give it out, you have to take it. You have to take it. But I still do believe in ladies first. So why don't you start out? Because one thing by the way, it's a really healthy thing to do is just to have a debate with someone because it makes you process and think. And then after you get off, you think of all these things. And so we both had some things we never shared we want to share. So take it away.
Right. Well, I just want to reiterate that I don't really have a problem with Connecticut College specifically in this specific case and asking the student to withdraw the test score. Because I think they're operating within a system and they're trying to operate within this student's best interest within their system. My problem is with the system as a whole. And I think it's a problem for education in general. And I think it's a problem probably for our society in general. Because schools are using their high test scores and their low admission rates to market themselves. But they're not differentiating themselves or talking about what they offer to students. They're marketing themselves by who they exclude and who they admit. And that's not a good identification. How do you know which school is good or bad for you with that? It makes it hard for families to tell what's a good fit. And instead, you're confusing families with inflated and often inaccurate statistics. Now, I just think that manipulating data to this extent goes against the value system that most colleges educationally espouse and try to teach. Most colleges value things like the truth, scientific accuracy, and developing critical thinking skills in students, yet these marketing strategies do exactly the opposite. They obscure the truth, they try to sell the schools on a scarcity model or on a peer group affiliation, only the smart kids can come here. And instead of trying to give students an opportunity to make a personal assessment of whether that school is good for them. I don't think it's right ethically to manipulate your statistics in this regard, to mislead children, basically. And you will make the argument, Mark, that, well, all the schools are doing it, so they have to do it. But I would make the argument back that, these are social constructs. They're not permanent. They're not like the laws of gravity. You can't argue with gravity, but these are things that people decide upon, and colleges could decide to change. They could get together and they could decide to change and try to change their marketing tactics to something that I think is more accurate and more ethical. And I think schools right now, they're trying to give the impression that they hold all the power by it's very hard to get in here. There's not enough spots. You have to score really high on these tests and you better panic and you better just accept us as we are. And I actually think that consumers have a lot more power than they think they do. If you decide not to play this game and you decide not to accept all the assumptions that high test scores, however accurate that is, equals a better school, then all of a sudden your options open up. You're just looking at what's good for you. And I think if consumers as a group or applicants say, you know what, I'm not going to apply to that school. I don't like the way they do their marketing. They're manipulating their statistics. They lie about it. They're trying to rise in the rankings, and I don't want to go to that school. Then I think people will start to back off of it. I think all the schools will start to back off of it. And I just think that our job as consultants, we right now, we're trying to help each student play the game back, right? You got to say this, you got to demonstrate your interest there, submit your test scores here, don't submit it there. And we have to do that. We're trying to help individuals. But I think as a group, we need to really push back on this and start educating the public at large about exactly what's going on, exactly what those statistics mean, exactly what U.S. News and World Report ratings mean. and just to really try to open their eyes to how misleading this marketing can be. And I think at that point, if we can do that, then we'll really have improved society as a whole, because people will be going to school in a more honest way based on what is good for them. And schools will have to try to market themselves based on what is good about the school, not about what is good about the people who are going there. And that is the end.
I didn't realize how hard this was going to be. So we Lisa and I agreed on some ground rules. And that is, she gets to state her case, and I cannot interrupt her, even though I was biting my tongue over here.
That was really hard for you, Mark. I thought your eyes were going to pop out of your head at a couple of points.
Yeah, they were close. It didn't mean you didn't have some good points, though. You had some very good points, I will concede, but I didn't agree with everything, but a lot were good. But our ground rules are, she makes her case, then I make my case, and then we cross-examine. So I say I have 4 points. First one, I know in our last session you referred a lot to like capitalists here and capitalism, and at one point you said they don't get their bonus and all this stuff, and I felt like I was watching Michael Douglas on the Wall Street. Greed is good. See, I actually can drop a movie reference. Don't have a heart attack. I've seen a movie or two.
Old movie reference. Remember the
well,
cell
at least
phones
it's a
that?
movie.
They're like the size of like a shoebox.
That's like a real movie. It was called Wall Street.
All right, go on. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. See, I just interrupted you.
That's
right
okay.
there.
That's all right. It was okay. I invited it. So people that go into admissions, they are the most humanistic, caring, others-oriented. They're like social workers, or it'd be like if you went into the poorest school district in the country, to me, and you started talking about the teachers being capitalists and thinking about their bonus. Like, no, I chose not to go into a profession that was all about making money because I just want to help kids. And that's how admissions people are. They go into it to help kids. They intentionally don't choose careers that are money focused and to make a difference, often against great resistance. I mean, I try all the time to get people to go into admissions. I think it's amazing, but I never get enthusiasm, never from a 16-year-old and never from a 20-year-old. No money, no prestige, it's not going to wow anybody. It's just something later some people discover, wow, I really get a lot of joy out of helping people, and they choose to do it. So that's the first thing. Like, I just don't even relate to that accusation because it's just not the motivation behind how people think and why they choose to do what they do. And the hours are long. Like, a lot of times, depending on where you're going, you might come out of college at 22. You might make $32,000 depending on where you're going, your first year out. And you might be working from 7 in the morning till 9, like all day. You're doing fairs. You're traveling and travel season, 5-6 visits a day. Then you have to type up your notes and different things. Then you go to school fair. You get back late, and then you do the whole thing all over again. You got 150 emails, and you're doing all that. So, I just think that's the context of their motivation and why they do what they do. And I think that's just really, really important. And that's a point I just didn't sense that. So that's my first point. Second point is, I'm going to quote from Jim Jump. He writes a column for Inside Higher Ed. And he's a director of college counseling at St. Christopher's in Richmond. And his column's on ethical admissions. So he's always talking about, like, what is an ethical approach to college admissions all the time. We've featured his articles a couple times in the news. But he had a line in his January 8th article that I really liked. And I felt like it wasn't captured in your rebuttal. So here's what he says. College admissions has always been a balancing act between the institutional interest and the public interest. And I feel like, understandably, the public can only see things from their perspective. It'd be like if somebody was farsighted, then they can see far things, but not near things, or they're nearsighted, they see near things, but not far things, because that's the lens through which they see the world. It's not that they're at fault, but that's just the perspective that they have. And so when you're talking mostly to parents, that's the lens through which you see it. But there is another institutional side, and that side is really important. So it would kind of be like me saying, hey, Lisa, I'm going to be visiting Joy in May. Why don't we visit UNC Wilmington and check it out and tour, and then we do a spotlight? And you say, sure. And then I say, I'll be there May 3rd. We're going to leave at 8 o'clock. We'll leave from Hillsborough Street. And you'll be like, whoa, slow down, young man. This has to work for me too. And I think that's oftentimes how the public sees things for nobody's fault. It's just that you only see things through your own lens. And how could you? You haven't sort of had that other perspective. And if you did have that other perspective, I think it would really change a lot of things in terms of how you would see them. And you would see things differently. And it wouldn't just be like, okay, this works for me if you do this, that, and the other. And things have to also work for the institution. They can't only just work for the individual. And so I agree, Jim Jump, the guy who writes the ethical admissions column. Admissions has always been a balancing act between the institutional interest and the public interest. And so we're talking with parents, and so parents have their lenses, and it's a parent lens. So I just think that's kind of an important point. So that was the second point that I wanted to make. Another example, let's say you want a promotion at work. Well, it's probably not good to say to your boss, I want to start working from home from now on. I want a 4-day work week. I want 12 weeks off vacation. I want a whole office set up with every imaginable amenity. Like, that may be your needs, but if you want to get a promotion at work, you really kind of need to start thinking about what your boss's needs are too. And they might need you to sometimes come into the office and sometimes come from work. And, we have multiple people on both coasts, admissions people and financial aid people, about a handful that I know that don't miss very many episodes. And I find it actually really helpful because they give a lot of feedback. And it's helpful for me because it's now been 13 years since I've been in the admission office. And so I like to get checked on stuff as well. A message came in very recently from an admission officer, and it basically said listeners would benefit a lot if they could learn to think the way institutions think. They would have more success in this process. And it would lead to better results if you can kind of learn to think the way an admission officer thinks. So that's kind of my second point. And then my third point is, so when we were talking about protecting the profile, I think that comes off, the sense I got, is it comes off like, what is some ridiculous, insignificant piece of paper that says your scores go from a 1350 to a 1320? Like, why should that even matter? That's so insignificant. But here's another way of looking at it. So anybody can fill your school up if you let anybody in. So the way admission offices are evaluated is usually not, is it full, because anybody could get in if you have no standards. So the way an admission office is oftentimes, looked at is through a lot of different factors. And there's a wide range of different things. We're focusing here on test scores, but there's lots of factors, right? So you got to show your geographic reach, different countries, different states, your racial, ethnic. How many top kids are you attracting? Some schools produce things like valedictorians, salutatorians, percentage of kids in the top 10%, GPA, AP scores, class presidents, first gen, how many Pell recipients. So some of them are like access goals. Some of them are more high achievement goals. And then it could be other things as well. But the point is, there's so many constituencies that are watching that like a hawk, because you get no credit because you're full. How do I know you're not just letting everybody in? And some of those constituencies are, I mentioned last time, mostly students and parents. I focused on that. This is what students want to see. This is what parents want to see. But it's your provost, it's your faculty, it's your alumni, it's your president, it's your board. They're watching this stuff like a hawk. So I look at it almost like, I remember a few episodes ago, Lisa, we were talking about comps when we were talking about Sewanee University of the South. And you're like, oh, I did comps at University of Chicago. So when you did comps, that's partly how you were evaluated. So I don't think you would say, hey, it doesn't matter how you go in there and in your comp, just do the heck whatever you want. Who really cares, like, what they think? No, like, that was kind of really important because you knew that you were being evaluated. And so your evaluation mattered to you, and you're going to a certain degree, want to make sure that you get a good evaluation. And so when you have the provost, the faculty, alumni, the president, the board, parents, students, everything watching the stuff like a hawk to see, is this school going forward or going backward? Is it progressing or is it regressing? Like, that's not the kind of thing you're going to ignore. You're just not. And you're still in the business to help people, but that's the institutional perspective. You're going to do it in a way where you don't also hurt yourself. And then the last thing I want to say, and then I can't wait for your rebuttal, because you know I'm chatterbox, so you know I went longer than you already. So, you know this already, Lisa, but right after we had our debate, I happened to be in a group session with Andy Strickler, who, Dean of Admission at Connecticut College, and he brought this up. It was so surreal, because you and I literally just talked about this, and then bang, I'm in here, and then he brings it up. He says, he's shaking his head, and he's basically saying, I got killed on Twitter the other day. And he's shaking his head, and then he says to there's 7 other directors and deans of admission there, and he says, how many people heard about what happened to me on Twitter? Everybody heard. Everybody knew about it. It was like a big kerfuffle spread all throughout. Then he says, put your hands up if you would do what I did. The way he said it was, put your hands up if you try to help a kid by telling them when you think their scores are going to help them or hurt them. And the interesting thing is, there were a few hands that went up and not that many hands went up. The overall reaction to most of the group was, you know what? I'm not even going near that. Like, you threw yourself in the lion's den. God bless you. I know nobody questioned you was trying to help a kid, but it's just not even worth the blowback that you're going to get when you do something like that. And that led to several things when he said that. One, I had a flashback to a memory I had when I was doing boarding school admissions. And this family called because they were really upset their child didn't get in. And they were trying to kind of figure, like, can you just give me something? Like what was wrong with the application? And I felt for the family, because I know I would not want to be that person that just gets stonewalled and gets told nothing. So I couldn't say everything, but I did sort of, I said, well, a really competitive year, and, the transcript just wasn't as competitive as some of the other ones. So I'm a loud talker. So my boss hears me. I get called in. Don't you ever do that ever again. And I understand why. It's like, look, last thing we need is a lawsuit because somebody sues, like they might find out whatever. Some alumni kid got in that had a different transcript, and then we had a lawsuit. And I felt like Andy Strickler, like, I'm just trying to help a kid, and now I'm getting bedraggled and beat up. So I felt for him, because he was like coming out of the boxing ring. All I'm trying to do is help a kid, and I get all this blowback. And then the last thought I had, because there's 2 other things. So I'm in another counselor group. Not the one that we started here, but it's got like 20, 25 counselors, all independent educational consultants. And this came up in our meeting there. And as an interesting perspective, it was different than our conversation, Lisa. Everybody felt like it's great that Andy Strickler did this. I get upset at all the schools that won't say anything. I tell my kids to reach out to them and say, should I submit my scores or not? And they say, that's kind of up to you. And so that's where all of their anger was. Like it's already confusing. It's already difficult. It's already stressful. And somebody reaches out and you won't help them. And then my final thought, I promise this is my last thought. So
Don't believe
I know
me,
you're skeptical. I know you're skeptical. You have a right to be. So, the way we discussed this was kind of like everything had been gone through committee, and the committee had said, look, if this kid gets rid of the scores, then we can accept them. And that's maybe how it went down. But there's another way that it could have gone down. And I know that I've had experiences like this in admissions. You get to know the people on your committee, and you can know sometimes that like this person's totally into test scores. They're not going to go for this kid. And so it could have been a situation where he really likes a kid. He knows them. He's trying to help them out. And he knows, I know the composition of my committee. Somebody's going to ding you because of the scores. So I'm going to reach out and try to help you so that you don't get denied because I really like you and I think you deserve to be here. I know I've had things like that before. Another example in a college context would be like saying to someone, you know what, you're showing a 1 on the AP. You don't have to list your AP scores. It's not required. Why don't you just pull that 1 off? Because someone's going to see that 1 and they're not going to like it. And so we don't know that that's what happened. Like, he literally may have just been, I'm trying to get you through committee and navigate you through. And I know from my experience, the people that test it really high, they're really brutal on people that don't test high. I've seen it over and over again. And so Chatterbox over here is going to stop and let you have a little rebuttal. What are you thinking?
Right. Well, Mark, I am not saying that institutions can't admit whoever they want. I think they should. I'm saying don't use test optional to manipulate your statistics and inflate your test scores because it's lying. And that's not right. It's anti, I think, what most of us in America value, and I think it's anti what most of these institutions value. It's confusing to people. And in that sense, they are doing something that I think is motivated by money and capitalism. And I am sorry, I have to say, as someone who works in the mental health profession, I take a little bit of umbrage to your social worker reference and your teacher reference for that matter, because social workers and teachers are only there for the individuals that they serve. They are not there to serve the institution. So admissions counselors maybe want to help people, but they know how they get paid. And you listed a bunch of ways of why they might agree to this system or feel coerced into the system because of the institution. So I don't think that really holds water. I'm not saying they're not great people. I'm not saying they're not nice people. I'm not saying they don't work hard. And certainly I think they should get paid more. But what I'm saying is it is not the same. And it's just wrong. I don't think it's good for institutions. I don't think it's good for kids. I think it might be good for consultants. I think it might be good for U.S. News and World Report. And that's who I see getting the bonuses on all this. Why are schools so intent on manipulating all this? It's because they think it's going to pay off in the end. And we've seen cases, and there have certainly been schools that have been caught lying on these surveys to U.S. News and World Report, some of them more than once. So, it's obviously important to them if they do it. It kind of upsets me. So we have the test optional movement, which I think at its base is good. It's trying to be fair, right? And then we have the COVID, which also, testing was terrible for all these kids to try to get tests. But then schools are using this to better themselves in a way that hurts students and it hurts the public. And ultimately, I think that will ultimately circle around to hurt a school.
So what did you First, I'm not clear where the line is. So you're gonna have to explain to me the line is, because I'm not sure what you're talking about. By saying, is it also lying if I say to a kid, I recommend you don't include that 1 you got on an AP because you don't have to do it, and it's going to increase your chances. I reach out to a kid, is that lying?
I don't think that is lying, but like I told you at the beginning, I don't think Andy Strickler is a bad guy. I think given his situation, he was trying to do what he thought was morally the right thing. But the whole thing, it's different to tell a child, maybe you shouldn't submit this bad test score because you'll get rejected from a school. It's a totally other thing for schools to use test optional to lie about what their admitted student profile actually looks like. That is a completely different thing. And you take schools, and we all know who they are, who ship this kid off here and that kid off there because they like you, they want your money, they don't want your score on the record. And this way they can, if you come in the spring, if you do this, if you do that. And I think that's just wrong. I'm sorry. I don't see how you could possibly defend that. That is lying.
Well, here's what I think. I think that if schools are very transparent about what percentage of people submit testing, then it's truth in advertising. If they want to hide that, then I would agree with you. If they want to make it look like, I'm not going to tell you because there's only 30% of people that submit it, and I don't want you to know that, then I would agree with you. But if they're very transparent, and a lot of them list, this is the percentage of people that submit it, this is the percentage of people that didn't. In fact, you can go right in College Navigator, and it has that data for most schools, which the schools had to reveal in order for it to be there. So I think if you share with the public, these are our scores, and this is the percentage of people that submit it, this is not, then anybody that's prone, I don't see that as lying. I see that as that's up to you to interpret that data however you want. What, do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, I mean, I do think that that's useful, but I don't think your average person knows to look for that. They look at the glossy brochure. They look at the ranking. They look at the web page. I have never seen an admissions web page. They might say our average ACT score is between 28 and 32. They don't have an asterisk, but we only counted 12% of the people who submitted, FYI. They're not emphasizing that. They may have to report it, but they're not, so I think it's still intent. The intent is to mislead. The intent is to inflate, and I don't know. I don't know what you can possibly say that will convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I don't think I will, because I'm seeing some feistiness over there from you. Like, this is like level 3 feistiness, taking it up a notch on me. But it's not just inflating. It's like you want to help a kid. Like it's not, that's part of it. Like, this is somebody who you like, that you want to see have this opportunity. And in this case, they actually publish, we don't recommend you submit your scores if they're here. And so the person just didn't read it. Like, you could say, forget them, they didn't read it, we'll just ding them. But this is somebody who, like, he could have just denied them, but he did it because he liked the kid and he's trying to give the kid a chance. The kid just didn't read the website notice. Like, we told you not to submit if these were your scores. They missed it. And so to me, that's like him being helpful. I don't see
I don't disagree with that. But here's the thing. Why does Connecticut College have a cutoff that they so stringently follow? Why do they do that? Because they want it to be higher. They might like kids who have all different test scores. And you and I both know kids who have high test scores and kids who have low test scores. And, a lot of them are like all wonderful people. You could like all of them.
So let me say something. That doesn't mean they have a cutoff, because I guarantee you, if it was a top athlete or a chairman of the board, kids, or influential alumni, there's kids in the school, and they'll be the first to tell you, that have scores in the 1200s or the 1100s, and they're in the school. But what happens in admissions, it's like, if you're someone who's going to like pull down our profile and make us look worse, so now it's going to be harder for us to compete, then you have, if you're going to make it harder for us to compete, then you have to be better than just the average kid. So it's not like they have cutoffs. It's kind of like the same way schools do preferential packaging. The more the kid is bringing to the table, the better the merit aid award is. And that's kind of how this works. Like, if you're someone that maybe you were just on the fence, then we don't want to actually hurt our position in the marketplace. Can make it more difficult for us to compete against other kids for someone that maybe was just on the fence. Now, if you're a superstar, that's fine. We list our 25th or 75th percentile. That's what the 25th percentile is. We're fine for you to be under the bottom 25, but that's not what happens to kids that are like right on the cusp. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think that there are so many kids now that because they're test optional who might be athletes or, legacies, or we'll never know what those test scores are. They're not going in, submitting their test scores and having it averaged into the admitted student profile anymore. It just disappears.
Well, you can get some data out of, sources like Common Data Set where you can see. You
can get data out of Common Data Set, but your average parent, your average family doesn't know how to do that.
Well, but the point is, it is disclosed. Like, and that stuff is pre-populated on places like Niche, College Data, Big Future. Like it is out there. Maybe I'm not saying everybody knows how to find it, but it's not like it's not like we're being completely clandestine, just hiding this from everybody. But you know what, Lisa? I don't think we're making any progress. I think I'm raising your blood pressure and making you like me less.
No, it's not that. It's just, I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying. I think you're trying to, your head is so far in the admissions game. You cannot step out and look at the whole picture. I have said 1,000,000 times, well, not 1,000,000, that's an exaggeration, 10 times that I don't think Andy did anything bad given his system. I think the whole system of using test optional to create misleading admitted student profiles to compete with other schools, to market yourself, is not a good idea. I think it misleads kids. I think it ultimately cheapens your school. And I think it introduces a level of gamemanship in something where it shouldn't be there. I mean, we are dealing with kids and families, and I am sorry. I know I'm supposed to consider all the needs of the institution, but, frankly, these institutions would not exist without kids and families. Who would go to them? We pay for it in a lot of different ways, and we support them, and we deserve to have honesty. And I think that like anything else is just, I don't know how you can keep defending lying because somewhere they disclosed it in a common data set that you know about and I know about.
No, they put it on their website. They say these are median scores. And if your scores are below that, then when we're looking at all academic factors, it's going to hurt you to be below that. So we recommend you don't submit. I don't see how that can be accused of lying. Like, it's right on their website.
But see, here's the thing. Then you lose data. So maybe they might like kids of all different stripes, right? All different test scores.
Sure.
And before, they had to acknowledge that when they said, these are all the test scores. Now, they're just only cherry picking and giving the test scores that they want to give to be more competitive. And that's lying, okay? That is not giving an accurate estimate of what you can do. And yet you might not be hurting one individual kid, but you were hurting all the kids. And you're, I think, eventually hurting yourselves.
All right. Last time I said I'm giving you the last word, and then I never gave you the last word. This time I'm going to really give you the last word. So I think it just boils down that we are going to have to agree to disagree.
All right.
You know,
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Because, I was trying to think to myself, what could I have, because I was thinking about the question I asked you at the end when I said, you're in charge, what would you do differently? And I was asking myself that this whole time, what would I have done differently? The only thing that I would have liked.
Last word went away again.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I wasn't trying to make a point. I wasn't trying to make a point. So I thought that was a different category. I wasn't trying to make a point.
You keep going. Tell me what you're saying. I want to hear it.
Well, the only thing that I was thinking I would have liked to maybe have done differently is to explain to people why you do what you do, like why, so many people are looking at us and judging us, and as an institution, we'll be adversely impacted. So we're telling you a way to help you without hurting us. But the problem is that's just so risky. Like, look, I'm having this conversation with you. I don't think you respect that, so I don't think other people will as well. I think they'll just think that's self-serving. I don't know if people will be able to perceive that. And I think, look at Andy. He tried to help somebody, and he gets blown up. And so I think, like, a lot of times that type of transparency really gets punished. It really does. Like, you want to be that transparent, but that would be a very risky move for a school to do. I would like to think I would try to pull it off and just explain it and trust that you can articulate it in a way that people can understand it. But I'm not sure. And I think that it's very understandable to you why so few people are doing that, because that's super, super high risky, what I just said. I think it's worth trying, but I could be wrong, because I know that you would have a lot of blowback. Look at when the director of admission at Kenyon came out and honestly just admitted that our girl pool is so much stronger than our boy pool. So we put a little bit of a thumb on the scales because we're trying to have gender equity and the girls want guys and we think all voices need to be around the table. She got tarred and feathered. So my experience is having that level of transparency does not get rewarded by the public. So I'd like to think you could be a little more transparent. I mean, I already think Andy was very transparent, but maybe even a bit more. But I also, I think any seasoned admissions person listening to this thinking that is incredibly naive, and that would be a disaster. But anyway, I think we've talked it enough.
Well, that's why I think that this is a capitalistic business, because, if you don't want to reveal what you're doing and how the sausage is made, because you know that people will get mad at you, then in some way you know that it's probably not the right thing to do. And yet you continue to do it because you want to be competitive with all the other schools who are also doing it.
I'm going to disagree with that, Lisa, because it's like holistic admissions. The public doesn't get holistic admissions. They think that most people think that if you have higher GPA, you have higher test scores, you should get in. And holistic admissions looks at the whole person, it looks at everything, and the public doesn't get that. And just because it's difficult to explain, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. It's just difficult to explain, like all the different ways in which you're trying to shape your class and look at the whole child. Most of the time, the public doesn't get that. They really don't. They have a big problem if a school takes a kid with lower test scores and lower grades over someone with higher test scores and higher grades. And you do that all the time in holistic admissions based on institutional priorities and based on how you're trying to shape your class and who's not there and personal qualities and all kinds of things. And that is an incredible difficult thing for people to understand, even that schools try to explain it. They just don't get it. So I don't agree that if it's too complicated to get it, it means you're probably doing something wrong.
I'm saying if you don't want to reveal what you're doing.
But the only reason you wouldn't want to reveal it is because you don't think the public will be able to handle it.
Well, and that, that's just so patronizing.
No, well, let's look at the example of Ohio. Let's look at it, Kenyon. I mean, she got blown up for just honesty. That it's not quite the same for boys and girls in the admission process. That was complete honesty. You respect her for doing it, but she paid a super heavy price because the public was like, we spent all this time in the feminist movement, and this is what we get? Are you serious?
But you see, again, maybe it's not good for society or the public or really anyone except for Kenyon to take women who are more accomplished and would be better candidates for school and reject them for their less qualified male counterparts. But they're doing it. And, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. I mean, I guess it's good she's honest about it. I'm not mad at her about that. But that whole policy, at what point did white men become a protected class? Because in all other aspects of life, they are outperforming us. They are making more money. They are getting higher positions. So it's just,
I get the anger about that. But here's what I'll say. And this is after having had lots of conversations with women about this. If you have a woman that goes to a co-ed school, she does not want that school to be 85% women and 15% men. She doesn't. So do you just ignore what your women are telling you, get us more guys here? So it's very complicated.
Right. Well, I guess my point is just I think schools should admit who they want. I just think they should not manipulate their statistics to compete with each other. I think it's dumb. It's like an arms race and no one's ever going to win. I think it's a waste of money. I think it's a waste of time. And I think it's unethical. And that's just the way I feel about it. And I'm sorry you can't see my point, but I will keep trying.
Hey, we're not going to agree on everything. I don't feel you see my point either. So we agree on both things. I don't think you see my point. You don't think I see your point. Hey, we're not always going to see eye to eye, but I don't know. Hopefully our listeners benefited from hearing us air it out. Are you mad at me over there?
No, I can't see you. Your video cut out a while back.
Maybe that was good.
Next week in the news, the Munger dorm is bad, but why? An article by Aaron Betsky from an interesting source that we usually don't reference, Architect magazine. Our questions from a listener is a question from Jennifer from Virginia. Regarding medical schools, is it better to go to a quote-unquote lower-tier undergraduate school and be at the top of your class versus going to a school where more of the students are at the child's level and therefore the student would be in the middle of the pack? Our interview is Understanding UCLA with Gary Clark, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions, UCLA. That is part 2 of 2. And our college spotlight will be the Understanding UCLA interview with Gary Clark.
All right, my friend, my brother from another mother. See you next week.
All right. See you next week. Next week, we'll have to include your analysis of what is ailing the Lakers.
No, maybe I'll break out another movie.
Yes. Let's see if we can get you into the 21st century now.
Well, Julia Roberts is from Atlanta, and I always kind of liked her a little bit, so I'm trying to go back and look for some Julia Roberts movies. I have seen a few. I saw Pelican Brief, and Pretty Woman. So I think I'm starting to make a little progress, my friend. Absolutely,
Julia Roberts, a nice, fresh, young acting face to add to Selena Gomez. Yes.
Hey, Atlanta's own pride.
Right. Nice to know you're up to Julia Roberts.
Oh, yeah. See how we bust on each other.
You're jumping up from Joan Crawford. That's good.
Okay, we better end this now. I'm behind. Okay. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Ruff. Our sound engineer who fixes all of our many errors is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Boss. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.